Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn TV live stream. I am super excited about my two guests today. I got my co-host Heather Osborn on the line with me as we speak. Don't want to get complacent about my guests. We are going to be talking to Stephen Mehler, author of From Light into Darkness. Has Stephen on the show many times. He is a veteran of Capricorn radio and TV. And Brien Foerster as well. Brien does not need much introduction. You got to check out Brien Foerster on YouTube and you'll see the prolific episodes that he has provided Peru and Egypt and megaliths. If you haven't checked Brian's YouTube channel, you just got to devour it when you get there. But Brien is an author as well, and he produces excellent little guidebooks. And if you want to learn about ancient technologies, you got to get a hold of these two guys. So I'll bring on my co-host first. Heather, are you with me on the call?
I'm here. It's great to be here, James. I'm really excited.
I know
two of my favorite authors and researchers. Yeah.
I know you're a big fan of Mr. Stephen Mehler and Brien Foerster.
I am.
So it's great to have you here, Heather. Of course, you have read From Light into Darkness for today's show, so we are going to touch on a few of those questions again. We have had Stephen on the show for that before, but let's refresh on a bit of that. I'll bring on Stephen first. Hi, Stephen. Great to have you on the show again, brother.
Thank you, James. It's great to be back.
Oh, bro, with so much goes on in the world, it's like I disappear for a while, I get consumed, and I come back to Stephen Mehler, and it's like every time I check in, I get an upload of what's happened. What's going on? What's new, Stephen? Where have you been?
Well, we did a tour to Egypt in April with Brien. It was our third annual techno-spiritual tour.
Sure.
And like every time we've talked to you about our tours, and you actually with us in 2013, James, for the inaugural techno-spiritual tour, we have found something new. We have found something new. We now, and we can get into this in detail, but we have now can upgrade the idea of the profound understanding of the ancient machining. We now have a harder material than granite to consider.
Really, Stephen, you got to roll this out, brother. Don't keep me waiting.
Well, okay. Many pictures of bowls have been pictured on the internet for years, particularly on Facebook recently.
Yeah.
Many of them look like they're a stone called breccia, that B-E-R-E-C-H-I-A. It's a conglomerate stone that forms in granite. It's dark with white speckles.
Yes.
However, we saw a particular bowl in the museum for many years, but in March of 2015. Yusuf Abdel Hakim Awayan, my beautiful brother who is the leader of our chemist school, said to me, come look at this bowl that was behind a glass case. He said he thought it was corundum. Unfortunately for us, we had our school geologist in the next room. I called her in, Susan Moore, who is now, we will talk much about her. She is featured in Brien Foerster's latest video on the Sphinx.
I've seen that.
She's the school geologist now. She came in, she looked at it, and she said to Yusuf, you're getting good. So what this means now is we have bowls that are not pure corundum. Pure corundum would be red like ruby, would be like sapphire. It's a mineralization of this stone, very, very hard. However, we now believe that they had bowls that had corundum mixed in it. So therefore now, that scale would be 8 to 8.5 on the Mohs scale, M-O-H-S. Granite being 7. Granite being 7. So now we have another smoking gun. They worked in materials even harder than granite.
That's incredible. I always thought, I know it depends on the granite, and I always thought the granite was 8 to 9 because of the crystal content.
No. Quartz is 7. Quartz is what gives granite its hardness.
Okay.
Feldspar is 6.
Right.
If it was just the substrate of granite, it would only be 6, which is basalt.
Yeah.
No, it goes basalt 6, diorite 6.5, granodiorite 6.5 to 7, granite 7 because of the quartz content.
Gotcha.
When you get higher than 7 than granite, you're talking about minerals, gems like ruby, like sapphire.
Having
like
corundum
forms in sheets of granite. That's how it's deposited. That's how we find it in the quarries. But it is mineralized and it is harder than granite, harder than quartz. You're looking at 8 to 8.5. Pure corundum, 9.
That's incredible. I actually, believe it or not, for some strange reason, I know all about corundum because my ex was a Virgo and I'm a Cancer, and I bought gemstones which were ruby and sapphire, and ruby and sapphire are the birthstones of Cancer and Virgo, but they only differ by color because of some impurities. So, and they're like a corundum.
The chemical content is what gives it its color. Exactly. We find that in the granite. We have a lot to talk about, because when we were at Baalbek, we had found 3 other streams of granite that we hadn't studied before. A purple granite, which was called by the Romans imperial porphyry, which we now know, because of Susan Moore, is porphyritic rhyolite. And people can Google that, RHYOLITE. It is a granite that is purple. The Romans loved it, but they didn't quarry it, and they didn't erect it. This comes from ancient chemists well over 12,000 years ago.
Fascinating, Stephen. Let's bring in Brian. Brian, you gave me a video today, the latest update in the series. Brian, man, this is awesome stuff. I just love your narration when you do these videos, Brian, because you're pointing out the stuff. You sanitize it down to just what we need, bite size. It's wonderful. And you brought in Susan Moore. I actually have seen the video today, so funny that you mentioned that, Stephen. Great video as well, Brian. We're looking at tunnels underneath the Giza Plateau at the Sphinx, and you look like I like the way you point out in the front of the paws. There looks to be some sort of a change in the bedrock.
Yeah, well, actually, it's really important to go to Egypt, and multiple times if possible. But I was simply standing on the wooden platform, which is in front of the paws, and Mohammed Ibrahim came up to me, and he said, "Look down. That section of wooden panel can be removed." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said that late at night, or the reason why they put the wooden paneling down there is not simply so that people can walk on it and keep their feet from getting dirty. It's because they've already had access to the tunnel system underneath the front paws. They do this work very late at night, and that's why the Awian family, who live across the street from the Sphinx, say that at 1 o'clock in the morning, these giant lights come on for maybe an hour or two and then turn off. And there's all this machinery is up there at night. It's because they're secretly digging underneath the Giza Plateau. And then in the daytime, the wooden platform is put back in place.
I have seen that.
There is evidence. Yeah.
Wow. This is crazy, guys.
And this goes back to the 80s. This is not recent. This goes back to the 80s. Some people put up on Facebook today, "Oh, Zahir Wass was digging illegally the last couple of years of his tenure." No, he was digging illegally for 30 years. Hakeem used to keep me up late at night so I could witness just what Brian said. They come on the plateau at night with machines, with lights. That's when they've been doing their digging for years.
Yeah. I know there was a controversy, and I see this in the video too, Brian, where you can see the drill cores that went underneath the Sphinx at different angles, and there's little caps to block them off. Didn't they drill at really stupid angles that they would never catch? They would never catch the chamber. So, there's no chamber there, because, well, there wouldn't be if you drill at that stupid angle. I mean, if you went down at a certain... and you can actually see that in your video, Brian. You illustrated that very well. You can see all the different angles that they drilled at. I have actually old footage of that. I have old footage of that somewhere on the channel, Capricorn TV.
Well, also they were drilling in what would be inappropriate places, because they were drilling halfway down the body of the Sphinx, not around the front paws. But the great thing about physically being in Egypt is that you walk past all of these capped tubes or core drills, and that's why I filmed it, because there's the evidence right in front of me, and there are at least 5, if not 10, of these things there. So, and of course, opening the little hatch in the in the rump part of the Sphinx and looking down. Luckily, it was loose that day and nobody was around, so we just pulled it out, looked down. There's a ladder going down there, and there's more of your evidence.
Wow, I see that.
Yeah, I wish I had been there with you at that moment, because I could have added the point that in the 1980s, Mark Lehner went down there with Zahir Wass. There was an NBC special in the late 80s, narrated by the late great Omar Sharif, that they actually went down there. So Lehner has been down there, and it ends in water. That's why they couldn't go any further. It ends in one of the water tunnels, but they've been down there since the 90s.
Incredible. Heather, let's come in at this point. I promised you a show with Mr. Stephen Mehler. Here we are. You have the floor.
Another interesting thing that you point out early on in the video is, Robert Schoch's theories about water erosion and an off-the-record date. If you could share some of that information.
That's more Stephen's area to discuss. But I think the great thing about doing a video like this is that we had a geologist standing next to us. So when people say, oh, I think it's 5,000 years, I think it's whatever, it's like, well, let's turn to the geologist. And Susan explained it quite well. Water erosion versus wind and sand erosion. So, yeah, this is really Stephen's topic.
But as Brian showed adequately in the video, because Yusuf mentioned it and then I did, there are several dates that Dr. Schoch has given because of his academic standing. When he first did the work with John Anthony West in the early 90s, he had to put a conservative date because of his academic, he's still a professor at Boston University. So he said at least 7,000 BC. And that's the date that Brian gave in the video. That's the first date Schoch said. Has to be at least thousands of years older than Egyptology says, because there was no climate to do that. But Schoch knows there was no climate to do it then either. He has given two other dates. As he mentioned, it's also mentioned in the video, he took Yusuf on the side and he said, this erosion could be 80,000 years old. And when he first came to Egypt with John Anthony West told me this off the record. You don't tell me something off the record when it has information like this. When Robert Schoch first saw the erosion in the back wall of the Sphinx, he turned to West and said, my God, this could be 100,000 years old, but don't quote me on it. Okay? So that's why there's different dates.
You help others to find.
As I mentioned in the video, when I was with our geologist Susan Moore last year, I discussed this event, which is part of the paleoclimatological record, that 30,000 years ago, there was a major event. It's called the Mousterian Subpluvial. Anybody can Google it, can find it. I did it. It's included in my first book, Land of Osiris. I had to look it up before that. Around 30,000 years ago, there was severe rainfall in Africa for thousands of years. And as Robert Schoch, Dr. Schoch, brilliantly stated, the type of erosion that's seen there cannot be just from a flash flood or a flash rainfall. Some of the hardest layers of limestone, which are its sedimentary rock, forms in layers, some hard, some soft, some harder. As I mentioned, the hardest layers are the most eroded. So he has postulated only water beating at an angle severely for thousands of years could cause that type of erosion. So the only marker we have geologically is this date 30,000 years ago, meaning the Sphinx, as Brian again said in the video, she had to have been carved way before that, for that erosion to have occurred 30,000 years ago. Abdel Hakim Aoyan, the founder of chematology in the Kemet School, gave us a date for the Sphinx of 54,000 years. I have been saying this for 20 years. No one yet can prove that wrong.
Wow. The rainy climate around 30,000 years, is that our best window? I mean, you could probably double that or whatever for the 80,000 year one. I mean, I know John Anthony West. John Anthony West likes it to go back a precessional cycle in terms of the going back 12,000 years plus a precessional cycle.
Yeah, but see, here's where we disagree with John Anthony, because he sees the Sphinx as representing Leo and Virgo, meaning there was astrology when the Sphinx was created. Abdel Hakim tells us the Sphinx was created 54,000 years ago. There was no age of Leo, there was no age of Virgo, there was no precession. There's no evidence that humans practiced astrology or astronomy before 8,000 BCE. Barbara Hand Clow was the first one who stated that. I agree with her. Schwala Delubich, John Anthony West's main teacher, stated that. There's no evidence humans practiced astrology or astronomy before 8,000 BCE. People can argue that. We get into arguments about it. But we don't see the Sphinx representing any astrological signs. She is Tefnut, an aspect of the Great Mother. That's it. And it was a lioness human face originally that would have looked like Sekhmet and Mut look to us today.
Sure. Yeah, I know. I spoke to actually Barbara Hand Cloud quite recently. She had her on the show, Stephen. She's back on again next month actually for her new book. But she has developed this idea of catastrophobia. You know, and I know that Brian would focus on this a lot. I remember Brian's work showing Easter Island heads, and that there was a flood layer has to have come in. I know up in Peru as well, in Bolivia, it looks like a flood hit this planet. I mean, it almost then tells you that in the Ice Age, it's just not a time when you're going to build this thing. It has to be. I've no problem going beyond that. I've no problem going beyond it because of the geology, but I've no problem going beyond it because you just don't build things in the Ice Age.
Yeah, well, you see, Ice Ages didn't affect Africa, so there's a misnomer right away and a misunderstanding that geology is given out, that the Ice Ages affected the whole world. Ice Age did not affect Africa at all. The climate's changed. No, we think, again, and I want Brian to come in here. One of the main things that brought Brian and I together in our research is we saw evidence of cataclysm. He sees it in Peru and Bolivia. I saw it in Egypt. It was one of the main things we came together in, Brian.
Yeah, that's very true. Also, when Robert Schock and I were together on Easter Island, he said to me, after looking at 3 different of the megalithic works there, because there's a lot of Polynesian construction, of course, of small chunks of volcanic material where they piled up walls, but there are 3 very distinctive megalithic features, and he said, I have a problem in dating these at 12,000 years plus. So that adds it in. But as Stephen said, all of the megalithic work in Peru and Bolivia appears to have undergone an incredible cataclysmic destruction. And since the Inca could not possibly have done the workmanship, and there's no record of anyone existing before, as Barbara Hanks-Lau says, there must have been a cataclysmic event that was global in nature around 12,000 years ago that caused the survivors to go into traumatic shock for thousands of years. Almost all knowledge was forgotten, and so that's why conventional archaeology, etc., can't figure out or refuse to even look at the idea that these structures are older. But as Barbara Hanks-Lau did, according to oral traditions, you do get glimpses into this, into the fact that there were other races of people or beings, if you want, that existed in the very distant past, and they were the great megalithic builders who had much more profound mental capability than we have, and technology that we have not yet reinvented.
Sure. Brian, just kill your video while we're chatting here. I think we've lost your bandwidth's gone down a bit just while we're chatting. Heather, do you want to pass comment on that? You want to come in?
I wanted to go back to the Sphinx for a minute, to what Stephen was bringing up earlier, because in the land of Osiris, Stephen, you talk about the matriarchal lineage of ancient Kemet and how important that is. And I think the Sphinx, from your philosophies and interpretations, is very reminiscent of this ancient mother goddess culture and symbolic of that. Why are academics so resistant to seeing the Sphinx as a matriarchal figure? Because it really symbolizes, doesn't it, that shift from the matriarchy to patriarchy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, we could spend hours on this subject alone. I mean, because I have a master's degree in women's studies from San Jose State University. I was a feminist in the 70s, long before I met Hakim. But one of the first things he was talking about. So let's just give the Cometian myth and why she comes, who she is. To them, this was a matriarchal society. So descent went from mother to daughter. So mother-child was the only relationship they understood. So in their understanding, the mythology they tell, when the great mother, who was known to them as Nut, spelled N-U-T, and I've actually had people giving lectures where they say nut, and you know that's somebody who knows nothing. So it's Nut. So Nut is the great mother. She controls all that is manifested and all that is unmanifested. So in other words, in their thinking, in their matriarchal understanding, it wasn't saying that the feminine and the masculine were equal. Polarity comes in later. In their understanding, the feminine calls the masculine into being. So the feminine was the creatrix. So they have this story. When Nut herself wanted to manifest in physical form, she spit on the earth. And that's the name Tef Nut. The spit of Nut also represents moisture. But the spit of Nut. Why spit? People would ask Hakim all the time. So I'll use the scientific term. When we expectorate, every time it's never the same. It has no volume, no mass. It can't be measured. So basically the ancient people were saying, you cannot define the Great Mother. But if you must, there she is. We will create a statue to her. The first thing they created was just the head. The head was the only thing sticking out of the sand. As you can see in Brian's video, and we would hope everybody would go see this video who has not seen it before the show. We'll see it after the show, because Brian adequately talks about how the ground level of the plateau was where the neck of the Sphinx is. So the body of the Sphinx was hollowed out of the limestone bedrock, and the blocks that were taken were huge 100-ton blocks that were made to put forward to make what was now known as the Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple. So she is actually below sea level where the body is. The level of the plateau is her neck. So it was just what was called in geology a yardang, just a form of limestone. They came, Hakim tells us, they would come to this spot 56,000 years ago. Before there was a Sphinx, they knew this was a sacred spot, a power place. People would come, as he would say, to energize themselves. But when she wanted to manifest, when they got the idea of creating the physical form, they carved the head. And the head would have looked like, as I said, like it's a human lioness combination, because if you folks go to the Temple of Karnak, as we've taken our group every year, we always take our group, and you look at the statue of Sekhmet in her chapel, and you look deeply in her eyes, you will see that they are human eyes. They are not cat's eyes. So it's a human lioness combination. That was what Tefnut was. That is what Mut is and Sekhmet. Then, thousands of years later, as we know geologically, again from the work of Dr. Robert Schoch, thousands of years later, they would have carved out the four chests and the four legs, and thousands of years after that, they would have carved out the rump. We know that the erosion in the front of the Sphinx is twice as it is in the back. Dr. Schoch found that out in the 90s. So he said, obviously, it was carved in 3 distinct stages, but 54,000 years ago is when she appeared as Tefnut. The first thing manifested was a feminine to the matriarchal culture, an aspect of the Great Mother. Why don't they recognize it? Because Egyptology is mostly men. It has changed since the 70s. Since the 70s, women have been able to get PhDs. I tell the whole story of a great lady named Margaret Murray, who was a disciple of Sir Wimble Flinders Petrie, actually fell totally in love with him. She was the first woman to ever get a PhD in Egyptology in 1903. It took 50 years before another woman was given a PhD in Egyptology. But I recommend her book to this day. I recommend her book to anybody starting out. A book she wrote in 1949 called The Splendor That Was Egypt. She talks about it being matriarchy in that book. She was the only woman in the field. She was totally ignored by her colleagues, and they're totally ignoring it today. They don't recognize the Sphinx. You still see Zahir Watts. He'll still come on National Geographic and say when he talks about this.
I have a 1942 copy of The Splendor That Was Egypt, Stephen.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
No, 1949 is when it came out.
49 then, isn't it? It's a 40. Yes, it's from the 40s. Yeah, 40.
I do. I have a pristine copy too.
Stephen, we'll have to swap stories sometime, because when I was working on my PhD in goddess mythology, I ran into the same kind of problems. So we'll have to talk sometime share some stories about what I encountered too.
Of course, as I said, I started from the matriarchal understanding, because when I started doing really serious research in Egypt in the 70s, I recognized it, and that's why I got a master's degree from the Women's Studies Department, and my master's thesis was the role and position of women in ancient Egypt from 7,000 to 1,000 BCE. And I spoke for 5 hours.
Wow. Stephen,
that's fantastic.
I just want to draw a comment on what you said about the blocks. You can't separate the Sphinx from the Sphinx Valley Temple. A lot of people just see these as two separate entities, but you just can't separate them. The quarried material from the Sphinx enclosure is what's built this Sphinx Valley Temple.
And we had to show that to Susan Moore last year, because she did not see that at first. She saw the baseline of the plateau, and she said, no, that's the baseline. But then when you came around the side, it's constructed blocks. And she finally had to realize that they had constructed the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple out of the blocks that were taken from the Sphinx Valley. It is an amazing thing. And Brian shows that clearly in the video. Clearly.
Yeah, let's bring in Brian. Brian, you show this layering that even the heterogeneous layers of the blocks that they quarried all match up with each other, where they took a block, they put it in place, they take another block, and they put it in place.
That's right. They, obviously, I'll have to do a better job of it next year, but you can clearly see that they were systematically removed from the Sphinx enclosure to create the Sphinx and Valley temples.
The size of these blocks, Brian, they're enormous. I mean, they didn't just quarry little tiny blocks. That would have been the easy way to do it. I mean, what's the size of these things?
Well, I would estimate 10 to 40 tons.
Wow.
Of what's left. Of course, the whole thing has been deconstructed over time. And it was much bigger, much higher.
So are we saying the Sphinx Valley Temple is contemporary with the time that the Sphinx was built, 50,000 BC, something like that?
Yeah, it would be within a couple thousand years. Again, the first thing would have been the head carved. Then a couple thousand years later, they would have started removing the stone. So the temples are thousands of years younger than the Sphinx itself, but still maybe 30, 40,000 years ago.
It's incredible. Of course, we see this encasement of the older limestone walls with the modern construction. It's like we put like a drywall up and protect our buildings today ourselves. We do that in our modern construction. It's like they were protecting the decaying structure.
Again, if we go around the side of what's called the Sphinx Temple, we can find that they were granite ashlars, that they actually covered the limestone with these granite ashlars. We believe in insulating effect. One of the things there's so many offshoots here. We have electricians now, a lot of people seeing that they use the stone like Faraday cages. They would use shielding. Depending on the quality of the stone, you could have granite then shielded by limestone, even mud brick. They understood, and again, this is why Susan Moore and Robert Schoch, to have geology, to me, to be an archaeologist and not study geology is blasphemy. I cannot understand how these guys could go out in the field as archaeologists and not know any geology. I just cannot understand that, because they're constantly getting it wrong. Once we understand the stone and the quality of the stone, we even can have better understanding of how they used the stone, because they understood the intrinsic qualities of each kind of stone. And we're seeing so many different kinds of granite. You just can't say granite, James. We can identify 4 or 5 now different types of granite that they use. And granodiorite, it's a whole other thing we learned. Diorite that's turning into granite. That becomes 6.5 on the scale. Diorite, it's 6. It goes on and on and on. How they use stones and this breccia that they love. And now we see that they had no problem machining the fine. I can send you a picture of this bowl. Incredibly,
please send me a picture, R. Stephen.
Chris Dunn is analyzing it now. He said the machining is unbelievable. And it's in corundum. It's 885.
Corundum. I just, when you say corundum, it's incredible. It's
off the wall. When Yusuf said that, I just almost dropped to the floor. And when she came in and she verified that all bets are off.
If you
There's nothing these people. No doubt that they had diamond tools, that they worked in diamond. They used sound to soften stone. We can get into the whole thing now, and Brian is working with me on this. We're coming up with all different types of understanding. They use sound to alter the physics of stone. They didn't have to melt it. People are looking at vitrification, thinking they had to melt the stone and then mold it. They did not have to. They altered the physics of the stone, which then made it softer, easier to cut, but they still were using diamond tools.
Perhaps that's why they were using crystalline stones, because the crystalline content would vibrate in an oscillatory way with acoustics. Any crystals, all crystals vibrate. That's what they do. And if they're able to soften the structure by doing something to it.
But here our geologists get through another monkey wrench at us. Susan Moore told us it's not the quartz content that gives granite its acoustic qualities. It's the tightness of the bond in the feldspar. The quartz is there for transmission of energy, piezoelectric. You squeeze quartz, it produces an electric charge. So the acoustic effects of the stone is the tightness of the chemical bond. And there's no doubt these people knew it better than we do. They chose the stone for its acoustical qualities, no doubt about it.
Stephen, if you went to an engineering company and you handed them a slab of corundum and you said, I need you to carve that for me, they would call for security and think there's something mentally wrong with you. They would mentally go, there's something wrong with this guy, get him out of here. That's the reality of it, though. That is the reality.
It wouldn't be cost efficient. Exactly. And the first thing Chris Dunn did when he came back from the Serapeum is he went to the greatest granite manufacturers in the United States and said, okay, look at a picture of this box made out of one piece of granite. How would you do it? First of all, he said, we wouldn't do it like that. We would make 4 sides and we'd bolt it together. Because, they said, no. It has to be done by one piece. How would you do it? They said, I don't know, but your starting price, your asking bid is $1 million before we even start the project.
Wow. I know anybody I talk to about Egypt, I just say, go to Capricorn TV, look at the Serapeum, and I navigate people. I'll do it one-to-one, I'll send to people. I cannot talk about the Serapeum long enough. I mean, I just think it's the most spectacular thing I ever got to witness, and I did it on a chematology tour. I had the pleasure of seeing Yusuf in action there with yourself, Stephen. The Serapeum, for me, I know there's other artifacts too, like you say. There's these vases and there's the intricate working of very heavy stones. But for me, seeing the Serapeum, it beggars belief just to touch this stuff that it has been done. It's obviously real. You can touch it. I know it's there, but it's still, my head is saying this shouldn't be there. It's not. It doesn't compute. Still doesn't compute.
And Brian has done several excellent videos in the Serapeum. Brian.
Well, the Serapeum is the most surreal thing I've ever seen, and it's my favorite place because it's just thankfully it's been open now for I think 2.5 years, but you have these 20, I believe it's 27, isn't it, Stephen?
There's 33 niches, 27 boxes.
Right. And just the level of precision, that was my previous video where I interviewed Yusuf in the Serapeum, and he showed quite distinctly the difference between the really crude etching on the surface and the machined surfaces. And clearly, whoever decided to put the hieroglyphs on did it much later in the construction of the boxes. That's what we find also in Peru and Bolivia. You find the famous cultures such as the Inca discovering an abandoned ancient site and adopting it. And that's exactly what the dynastic Egyptians did. When they moved into the area, they found certain structures there and adopted them, renamed them, and in some cases reused them. And that's also why we can completely, and for the last time, throw out this idea that the Great Pyramids on Giza were tombs, because certain aspects of them, the shafts and chambers, were used by the dynastic Egyptians, because why would they cut a hole in the ground when the hole was already there?
Sure. Brian, just switch to audio only while we're chatting there, because the video's breaking up anyway.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. We heard anyway. We heard you loud and clear. Just go audio only. Heather, you want to comment on that? You want to come in?
Yeah, Brian, one of the really fascinating things that Yusuf brought up in that video to go against traditional academia was he pointed out that it would have taken 20,000 men in order to carry just one of those boxes, and they wouldn't even have fit through the tunnel. So I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, well, actually, it's Ardal that figured out that because he did a lot of work on Easter Island trying to figure out how the giant moai were moved. So they had a 1-ton block of stone. And he figured out that on a flat surface, it would take 15 men to move that one block. You have a 100-ton block, then of course you multiply that number by 100. And, even greater accomplishments, such as the Colossi of Memnon, that each one of those seated figures was one piece of stone. The stone was moved from the Cairo area, and they weigh at least 500 tons each.
Wow. It's like they don't care about the weight. They couldn't care less what it weighs.
And to tell you, James, where we really saw that most evident was at Baalbek in Lebanon. I mean, this really throws everything out the window.
Let's talk Baalbek. I actually got Brian on Baalbek before on a different show. Stephen, tell me your experience of Baalbek.
This was number one on my bucket list. I mean, since the 70s, I've been wanting to go to this site, and it was more than I could have expected. And the amazing thing to me, as they date this site, the Lebanese archaeologists and all of archaeology, 67 BCE as a Roman quarry. Roman quarry. And here we're looking at 1,200-ton blocks of limestone that they threw around like they were Lego blocks, like they were toys. We found a wall in what became a temple of Bacchus to the Romans. Of course, the bottom wall was way before the Romans, that there were 4 blocks in a row of limestone, at least 800 tons.
That's incredible.
Amazing. We saw columns of this rhyolite, purple granite, that had to be at least 100-ton blocks. I mean, the amount of tonnage we saw, unbelievable. And due to some work from a German archaeological mission in 2014, they cleared away some of the dirt. We found that there is the so-called famous one is the stone of the pregnant woman. I'm sure Brian talked about. That's the one that we know is 1,200 tons. Underneath it is an even larger one, estimated to be 1,500 tons. And they were doing this all consistently. So obviously weight and the quality of the stone was not a problem. If you think about it from the engineering standpoint, as you do, you have to think about the difficulty of the job. And we had some great engineers with us in April when we were there. And this Alex Mott from Britain, great engineer, great to interview because he's just been to Bosnia and he can have a lot to say about that. But that's another story.
Sure.
But he was with us and we talked about the engineering feat itself to move these stones, cut these stones, and they're always cut at this 26-degree angle, just like the shafts of the Great Pyramid. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan is at the same angle as the stone of the pregnant woman is at Baalbek, 26 degrees. What is about that angle? And pointed out that makes it harder to move because the weight gets concentrated at the bottom. If you have a flat stone, at least it's easy to move. No, they moved it at an angle. So obviously, the idea that Abdel Hakim gave me in the mid-90s that they had to produce anti-gravity, obviously, that was the case. Edward Leeds Scanlon knew that. Other people have known it.
You've no other choice. I mean, if you want to, I think that one of the most beautiful things about the humanity on this planet is that we have mysteries, because mysteries appeal to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. His mysteries appeal to everybody, and we got some pretty big mysteries on this planet. And megalith is megalith is the first stop. I mean, you go to megalithic constructions. Look at Lebanon. I think they're discovering unfinished obelisks in the quarry. There's 1 or 2 extra ones. They're saying 1,400 tons. Is that right?
Yeah, 1,500 tons. We saw them. There's 2 extra ones underneath. They cleared the sand away in 24. They said they did an excavation. I don't call that an excavation unless you totally liberated something. But they cleared enough dirt away so that you can see there's 2 other obelisks that they had started underneath the pregnant stone woman, and one is estimated to be 1,550 tons.
You know what? I think whenever archaeologists make a mistake, like saying that the Romans built this, I think they should get slapped in the face. Just slap them in the face. Anytime they come up with nonsense.
More than that.
Just stop speaking nonsense. It's like...
But the key criticism is, okay, if the Romans had built this site with this imperial porphyry, with these 1,200 blocks of limestone, with this incredible stones, here at Lebanon, hundreds of miles away from the capital, wouldn't you have seen similar or even greater in Rome itself? Yet in Rome, there was no megalithic stone at all. Romans could not do it, period, end of discussion.
Yeah, I mean, the Romans lifted some bits they lifted a bit of tonnage, but they weren't interested in big stones. They didn't do big stones. They did it when they had to, like put a column up or something, but the tonnage that they lifted, they weren't looking for heavy tons. People say that they would have actually broke those blocks up and those unfinished obelisks and used them for smaller materials. Nicely perfect.
They couldn't do it. They couldn't break them up. They didn't have. We see that. We see that in the unfinished obelisks. Yeah, we see that in the unfinished obelisk at Aswan. They attempted to attack it and break it up, and they couldn't do it.
No, it's not just that. Baalbek is an incredibly complicated site, and it's not just the big limestone blocks. It's the fact that there are granite columns there, at least 200 of them, and the stone. If you feel the surface, unfortunately, they're all broken like almost every ancient site on the planet because one group of idiots decide to move in and beat up another group of people.
Yeah.
But if you feel the surfaces, each one of those columns was turned on a lathe. Some of them are 20 to 30 feet tall, well, at least 20 feet tall, made of one solid piece. And Susan believes that each one of those columns came from Aswan. So that's a distance of 1,000 miles.
Wow.
That's not something that the Romans would have maybe moved like 4 or 5 from Egypt if they wanted to show off, but more than 200 of them. And again, the cheap explanation from our guy, who, you know, is an academic, you know, when you say, why did the Romans build on such a scale? Again, these really bad answers come out from many archaeologists, and the official statement is it's because they wanted to show the local people their prowess.
Right. But
In other words, they have no idea what the hell was going on.
No.
Wow.
And again, just to add here, I highly recommend everybody go see Brian's videos on his YouTube channel that he did at Baalbek. Because as he's saying, we clearly show that Roman columns are in sections, just like the Greeks do. You go to the Parthenon, you go to the Greek sites. The Greeks had a great civilization. They did great work, but their columns are in sections. Roman columns at the Temple of Jupiter, Temple of Bacchus at Baalbek in sections. When you look at the ancient columns, that the stone that they got from Kemet, it's single blocks that were already there. Mm-hmm. That was a Comitian site. Again, Baalbek was an ancient Comitian site. They didn't even have to go to Aswan to get the stone. The stone was already there. It had already been brought from Aswan by the Comitians. Sure. And Yusuf Awayan also believes that the stone was brought from the Sinai. Why has the Sinai been a place that's been fought wars and wars over for at least 8,000 years? It's because not only the gems, the gold, the ivory, the mines, the turquoise, but the granite. There's at least, Yusuf believes, at least 5 to 6 different types of granite that comes out of the Sinai quarries. He thinks the syenite we find at Aswan is also in the Sinai. He thinks the rhyolite that we found at Baalbek, purple granite, is from the Sinai. We have to do a Sinai quarry tour. It's in our plans. The Kemet School is just in its infancy. There's so much more we're going to discover every year.
Sure. Heather, jump in there quick while you get a chance.
Yeah, you both brought up some really interesting comparisons between Egypt and Peru in terms of cross-cultural communication or, you know, things going on between the cultures. How about in terms of the use of sound for engineering and acoustics and healing? What kind of parallels have you both found in your research in regard to that?
Brian.
It's exactly the same thing. I wouldn't say that whoever did the work in Peru and Bolivia was the same people, but they were on the same level of incredible intellectual, not even intellectual, mental capacity, capability, which is beyond us. And that's what you have to take into account. Some of the construction techniques that were used in Peru and Bolivia are beyond 21st century technology, which almost nobody will accept because we think that we're the epitome of existence. And as Stephen knows, and as anyone who's studied any oral tradition knows, history goes in cycles. Civilizations rise and fall and rise and fall. And so what we're looking at are extreme examples of that, where in Egypt, Peru, Bolivia, and maybe a few other places on the planet, you had people of astonishing mental capability, physical capability, which is beyond what we can do. And that's why archaeologists won't even go near the subject, because they have to find some kind of explanation. But unfortunately, their explanations 99% of the time run very short of the truth. And that's why we're doing scientific analysis. We have geologists, engineers, etc., because these are not places for one single discipline. These are places for multidisciplinary study as well. The right brain is equally as important as the left brain. Mm-hmm. So we also bring people who are intuitive. And when you take all of this stuff and put it together, that's when you get full brain function. And that's where resonance, etc., makes a lot of sense.
Sure. I'm going to jump in there, guys, because we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I have a trip to Mexico in less than 2 hours, guys. So I got to pack a bag. But I've just done 3 shows.
Let me just say one thing to add on that. Brien Foerster does the best tours to Peru. It was so beautiful. He brought the chemist school there last year. Brien takes people into caves that are filled with all basalt, incredible carvings of basalt. We toned in there. It was exactly the same as in the temples, caves, and tunnels of Egypt.
Wow. I want to mention the 2 tours as well, guys, as we wrap up.
Great.
Guys, I mean, the April, I got to come to chematology again. It's been 2013? 2013, Stevens, when I was there with you guys, you and Brien.
I know, it's 2 years, went so fast.
It's going to be 3 years then next. It's going to be 3 years by next April. I got to come for a 3-year reunion.
Please do.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's make that happen, guys. I got to make a 2 big trips next year, one to Egypt and one to Peru.
Bring Heather along.
Heather, get over to Egypt.
Definitely. I love it.
But listen, guys, I mean, I love watching the chematology school, the chemist school of ancient mysticism. I love watching it grow. It's evolving and it's growing, and it's attracting the right people. It's attracting the right people with like you say, you keep making new discoveries on each tour.
It's amazing, James. You're right. It was an idea Hakeem and I had in the 90s. Yusuf and Patricia brought it to life in 2009. In the last 3 years, it has exploded. Yeah. Robert Schock is now doing tours with the Chemist School.
Excellent. That's great to have. That's only have Robert on board. I got to speak to Robert as well. He's got a new book coming out as well. Great to have Dr. Schock on board. The tour is next April. Of course, people can track the Chemist School of Ancient Mysticism on Facebook. I know you guys post there quite regularly. Brien, you're also going to do another chematology trip to Peru. Tell us a little bit about that. You have another one coming up next July.
Yeah, it looks like we're doing it every 2 years, but it's great to bring Yusuf and Patricia and Stephen because of their great knowledge of the ancient, stonework, acoustics, etc. of Egypt. So it's a comparison tour. We look at the similarities and the differences between the ancient megalithic works of both parts of the world. Again, I think that whoever did this work in both places were on the same level of capability. They may not have been the same people. But as far as I'm concerned, Egypt and Peru and Bolivia, as regards megalithic work, are the 2 most important sites on Earth. People keep throwing all sorts of, other locations in, but I've never seen anything as profound as those 2 major locations.
I agree.
For sure. Well, at chematology.com and hiddenincatours.com, you'll catch everything there. Just check these guys out. Chemist School of Ancient Mysticism on Facebook as well. Heather, have you got any final comments before we wrap things up?
I am just blown away. I mean, I could talk for hours to these 2. So thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. It's really wonderful.
Thank you so much, and let's do it again.
For sure. And Brien...
Definitely.
Brian, we've got to talk to you with my show with Maria Wheatley as well. We want to do a show together, so just in case I lose you. But guys, great to talk to you as always. Great, just keep the wisdom going and keep the enthusiasm. Stephen, you got to be one of the most passionate people I've ever met, except myself. I think you could teach me. You could teach me what passion is all about. Like, but I love you guys. You know that. So thank you for your time today, and talk to you not too distant future.
Have a very safe journey. Vaya con Dios.